And, people ask me a lot about like advice, young people who are coming up, for example. And I've thought about this a lot. I've given many lame answers because it's just so hard to give advice. What I've distilled it down to is the best advice I can give is it's not about you. If you can hold on to that through these experiences when it's challenging or you're working with someone or that's you're questioning or whatever, you have to not lose sight of the idea that it's not about you.
Hello and welcome. I'm moderator Esther Zuckerman, and I'm pleased to welcome Tony Shalhoub. Well, I did want to ask, once you sort of graduated and were working in the theater, sort of the process that led you to, for instance, getting Wings and sort of starting your career in TV.
Well, yeah. So after the drama school, what happened was a lot of people in my class, people went their way, their separate ways, and some went to New York. I didn't want to go to New York right. I mean, I couldn't afford to go to New York right away. I was in debt and I had no savings and no real, minimal support from my family. Financial support. And so lucky for me, the year before I graduated, Robert Brustein's his tenure was up at the school, and he left and he started the American Repertory Theater in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And so my third year at the school was under Lloyd Richards, a different dean. And so as we were graduating, Brustein talked to some of us, and he said, invited us to come up and join the company up there, which was again, random life-saving, Deus Ex Machina kind of thing, because I just did not have a lot of options. Yeah. Didn't want to go to New York and, live with 5 people and wait on tables. And I was kind of, the pump was primed and I needed to work.
Yeah.
So we went up to Cambridge. A couple of us went up to Cambridge, and it was fantastic. Yeah. First of all, if you've ever been to New Haven, and if you've ever been to Cambridge, I mean, it's night and day. It was really, really great. But we had a job. We had 10 months of work, and the money was really crappy because it was LORT money, but it was something.
Yeah.
Instead of paying to act, I was getting paid a bit. Housing was affordable. Didn't really have much. Didn't need a car. Great, mass transit there. Everything was great. In 10 months of a steady gig, and also a continuation, because it was Brustein, a continuation of what we had been doing at the drama school. So, he brought up directors, designers, we knew all these people, actors, all these playwrights. And so it was really terrific. And I was going to just stay 1 year. 1 year turned into 2, turned into 4. And because the roles were getting better, and, we were a company. Yeah. We had people jobbed in from other places, New York and other places, but mostly we had a core company. Cherry Jones was there, and a lot of great people. And in the course of those 4 years, I was able to save a little dough, and then it was time to try New York.
Yeah.
So, and better than that was we had, the New York Times would come up to review shows up there. Agents would come up to see their clients who were from the city or wherever. So we had contact with agents, New York agents. So they would say, hey, if you're thinking of coming to New York, give me a call, blah, blah, blah. So, I wasn't coming into New York completely unconnected. I had an equity card, did not have a SAG card then when I arrived, but I did have an agent. I was able to get an agent. So it was a little softer landing.
Yeah.
And then I came to New York and did, again, mostly theater. Did some day player stuff on soap operas, whatever we could get, did some episodic, like hour-long things that shot in the city. And there was a little bit of a Yale Mafia here, so I could, work at the West Bank or work at, I had a Broadway show and stuff. So Shakespeare in the Park, blah, blah. And then,
Casual.
And slowly sort of dipping my toe, getting auditions for film and stuff. So after about 6 years here and feeling really like I was gaining a little ground, I went to LA and hit a brick wall. And it was like starting over in LA, actually. But nothing I had done in New York seemed to count for much out there. I thought I had a fairly strong resume, mostly theater, but
yeah.
And then when I got to LA, it was like, do you have any tape on it? And I was like, tape? What? There was no tape. What tape?
Yeah.
I was, for years I've been hearing, build up your resume. And so there it was, a piece of paper with my picture on it. And no, needed tape.
Yeah.
So that was a bit of a, kind of a wake-up call, and it was tricky there.
Yeah.
LA tends to be a little more unforgiving, if you're unless you're connected. Anyway, so I had good agents there, and I was auditioning a lot. I just wasn't getting anything. I was not getting a call back or anything. And I thought seriously about, scrambling back to New York. But anyway, I had this one audition for Wings. It was a one episode. It was just a one-off.
Yeah. And
I had not seen the show because I was doing theater mostly. I was doing a play in LA too. And it had been on for maybe half a year or something, but I wasn't on my radar.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure I had a television, but no, I must have had a television. Anyway, I got the sides, and weirdly, the names of the characters were, in the sides, Joe and Helen, and those happened to be my parents' names. And Joe had a brother, Brian, and that was my father's brother's name as I live and breathe.
Okay.
And so I thought, well, this is crazy and Kismet-y. And so I went and auditioned, and I got this. It was the one job I got in all the months I was there.
Yeah.
And a few months later, they called and said, would I like to be a recurring on that? So
I want to ask about sort of the process of acting on a show like Wings or even Monk, where you're spending so much time with these characters like Antonio or Adrian Monk. And I was wondering what you like about it, how you sort of keep it fresh for yourself, how you sort of find new angles in these characters, especially comedic characters.
Yeah, that's a good question, because I found it daunting at first, because I thought, oh God, I don't want to get painted into a corner, which television long-running things can do sometimes. But what's really what I discovered was, if the writers are really good, and I had really good writers on both of those shows, they write to your strengths, and they help you sort of, it's a kind of a back and forth. You move the character in a certain direction, they capitalize on that, move it along further, and let it evolve, and that could be really, really fun and interesting. I mean, in sitcom, it's a little bit more limiting, because everybody's, kind of serves a certain function, and you're there to fulfill a certain, a certain color.
Yeah.
For lack of a better word.
I mean, in Wings, which was your breakout, you were doing an accent too. And I was wondering sort of what that was like, and sort of the experience of sort of spending so many episodes, figuring out, doing an accent, and how you found that, what work leads to that.
Yeah. funny you say that, because I was sort of doing this Italian or my version of an Italian accent, and then I'd meet people on the street, or they'd recognize me and say, "I love that Iranian character you're playing." Okay, fine. And while I was doing Wings in like '96 or 5 or 6, Stanley Tucci called, and he was getting ready to do Big Night, and so that was great. I had worked with Stanley in a play up at Yale Rep after I moved to New York, but I kept going out into the regional theaters again more, and we did a John Guare play up there. Anyway, Stanley said, "I want you to do this part and this," and I loved that script and everything, and
Yeah.
And he said, "So as far as the accent," I said, "Well, I've been doing an Italian character on the show." And he said, "No, not that accent." So when I did Big Night, I had a person, a dialogue coach, working with me on my Italian,
Yeah.
speaking Italian.
Yeah.
And I had another person just for the accent, and a lot of work. It's just like all of these humbling, experiences that one has.
Found in time, but I did want to ask, I had questions about Big Night and sort of just the experience of doing that, and also the experience of working with Stanley, who you had this previous relationship with, making the timpano, all of that. Right.
Well, Stanley and I worked together, just way before the movie. We just would work together, and he's an excellent chef, and his mother's an excellent chef, and we would work with her. She told us how to do this timpano, which was a tradition in his family, and eventually, then we went to work in restaurants. He would work out front, and I would work here in New York. First I worked with a guy in LA because I lived out there, and he taught me a lot. Just chopping and flipping food, and how to handle food, and how to not be too precious with it all. Yeah. And then he brought me into his restaurant, to work, which was really crazy because it was an open kitchen.
Oh my God.
So, you're there, and, and by the way, don't ever send anything back when it's a restaurant with an open kitchen. That's just a little word of advice. So I worked a lot with these guys, and then we came to New York, and I went to another restaurant and worked with that chef, and he was again working at the room, the table, and the host thing. So it was a deep dive, that movie, but God, it was a great experience. The filming of it was so, and I, meeting Isabella Rossellini and working with one of my idols, Ian Holm, who was a god in my, as I was a young student coming up, I was tracking his work all the time. So, Big Night was a bit of a game changer, really.
I mean, I did want to ask you about meeting one of your idols, like meeting Ian Holm, meeting one of your idols. Do you feel like you learned anything in particular from him, sort of on that set, whether by observing or just by talking to him?
Well, what it does is you're in the presence of greatness, and so you bring your A game. You do everything you can not to embarrass yourself, but he was so gracious and so. And what you discover is that everybody's just trying to help each other and do their best work, and that's the big takeaway.
Yeah.
I remember when I was doing Monk, I was a producer on Monk, so I got to weigh in on, guest casting and things like that. And there was a part of an older woman in this one episode, and a lot of names were being tossed about, Cloris Leachman and all these great people. And I suggested Jenna Rollins, because again, a god in my mind. When I was a student at college and all my life, really, those Cassavetes movies were monumental in my mind. And I threw out her name, never imagining she would say yes. And she said yes. And it was, again, I thought, well, now I could quit now. Really, because it's not going to get better than this.
I mean, well, yeah, what was it like having her do that, have interacting with her in that way?
Well, you realize you're on another plane when you're working with those kind of people. There were many in my life. I mean, I was fortunate that I crisscrossed with these people, and I didn't get fired. If you don't get fired, you're doing okay. It's. I mean, I guess it gives you a certain, for me anyway, it gave me a certain level of confidence and a certain level of, that I could trust what I was doing and take more risks.
Yeah.
And not, and not worry that I was on the wrong track.
Yeah. I want to go back a little bit in terms of film work
Sure.
to working with the Coen brothers and your sort of relationship with them, starting with Barton Fink, and how that role came about and what it was like sort of, I mean, because you're doing something so stylized in that performance as well.
I was living in New York then. I was still mostly doing theater and just I had a couple of experiences with film. And I had, I kind of, they were on my radar just because Fran McDormand was 2 years behind me at the drama school. So we overlapped that year, my third year. And then I went to see Blood Simple because I saw that she was in it and I always admired her. And I was completely bowled over by Blood Simple. Who are these guys? I've never seen anything like this. This is next level. And I think I saw Blood Simple a number of times. And then, cut to a few years later, the Barton Fink, I got to audition, and I really, really, I love that script and I love that role.
Yeah.
And I drilled down into it. And so funny, I'll never forget, I was running that scene in my head, or I was in the shower. I was in the shower. You like sing in the shower or whatever. And I had this really great acoustics, and I started really playing around with it sort of hit me, this character, the voice of the way it was written, the rhythm of it.
Yeah.
It felt a little bit like when I was a kid, there was a cartoon, Yogi Bear. And I kind of thought, God, it sort of has that musicality to it. And then I was sort of working on that. And then all of a sudden, Jackie Mason, this old Jewish comedian, kind of descended. And I started sort of melding those two things. And I thought, this part is just, it really had less to do with what I was doing than it was on the page.
Yeah.
If you just open your mouth, it comes out that way. At least for me, it did.
Yeah.
And I went and auditioned that for them, and they said, "Oh, thank you, and we're going out to LA because we're going to read. We have a lot more people to read in LA." And I thought, okay, that's the end of that.
Yeah.
And 3 weeks went by, nothing. It was radio silence. And then they came back and they obviously just didn't find the other thing they were looking for. So they just let me fly with it, really.
Yeah. I mean, did they have any reaction to this idea that you had of how to do the voice, like how to think, or did it just work?
I didn't invoke the name Yogi Bear to them. I thought that might be a non-starter. So I just did it, and I think they were. I guess it was different from what.
Yeah.
I think that's the kind of, people ask me, what about auditions and how do you do, if you can do anything different than instead of doing it right, because everybody's trying to do it right. And I think if you can find a different track for it, that's,
Yeah.
it's more often than not, that's going to work.
There's something so kinetic about that performance too. You're sort of climbing up on the desk like you're doing, and match with the voice. Was that sort of direction that you took from them, or sort of stuff that you did that they just sort of?
The desk thing was my shtick. We were just messing around, and I didn't know John.
Yeah.
He was at the drama school after me, just after, but we did not overlap there. But I had definitely heard a lot about him, and. I just thought, here's a Yale drama guy. I mean, he's all about walking out on the ledge, and I was really doing it more or less just to kind of get a laugh from him.
Right.
And they just were like, yeah, you got to do the desk thing. But the whole thing about Geisler was that he's very, he's in a position of power.
Yeah.
But there's 7 positions of power above him.
Yeah.
So there's a neuroses there. Yeah. That's why I said, when we go to lunch, and I said, I think what'd be nice is if we had milk and scotch.
Yeah.
And he alternates between the scotch and because he needs something to calm his stomach.
Yeah.
But he's a alcoholic.
Yeah.
So all of these things just kind of grew out of our conversations about how tightly wound he was. Because he's got, he's coming down on Barton Fink, and someone's coming down on him, and it's a Hollywood, old Hollywood or new Hollywood. It's all about fear.
Yeah.
Everyone's freaking terrified,
Yeah. I wanted to know sort of how your relationship with the Coens deepened and changed when you did Man Who Wasn't There. And what sort of led to that, the next collaboration with them?
Well, by this time I was living in Los Angeles, and they contacted me, and we had dinner and stuff, and they said, "We'd love you to look at this part." And boy, I would work with them any minute of any day, and it was interesting never having worked with tandem directors, kind of like are joined at the hip, and but that was just came out of, they said we've been Shalhoubless too long, and so I said, well, okay, and that was shot. I think we shot that in New York, in LA too, I think. But it was again, I can't, their writing is such that it kind of, you step on the train and it just kind of carries you. It's really there's not a whole lot of work to do. I mean, I think because what struck me in that story was that it's Billy Bob's character is so plodding and so slow, necessarily so contemplative, and I think to contrast that, I thought this guy's got to. First of all, he's not local. He comes from somewhere else.
Yeah.
So he's on a different trajectory, and rhythmically, I wanted it to be, and I think they did too. Again, because of the way it's written, I don't do the writing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to counter sort of the experience with the Coen brothers, I did want to ask about sort of the experience of stepping onto a blockbuster set and, when and doing something like Men in Black, where you're dealing with special effects and your head's being blown off and all of that. I mean, what was sort of stepping onto a movie like that like for you? And I mean, how do you approach it?
Well, I think that was the only reason I sort of got into that was that Barry Sonnenfeld, the director, had been on, I think, as a camera operator or DP on Barton Fink.
Oh,
he was working with the Coen brothers before me and during my time there. So he approached me and said, "Hey, we're doing this sci-fi thing." And once they showed me, once I went to the Rick Baker, he's the special effects guy, and they did all these head cast and make the gel pieces. And I thought, this is definitely just like theater. I mean, it's doing really balls out, broad, almost like commedia character. I mean, it's so exaggerated.
Yeah.
And that was free, liberating. I could go, because normally in film, everybody's like, bring it down, it's all in the eyes. This was like, hey, this is me unleashed.
Yeah.
Just because I'm competing with the ears, the eye, which goes that way, the contact, and the kind of the teeth, sort of Jerry Lewis teeth. And I'm thinking, in order to just have a voice here, I have to outdo the sight gag.
Yeah.
And Barry was totally, on with that. It was like, great, go. I mean, there were a few times where he maybe not.
Well, I mean, what do you like about sort of the experience of going big when you're allowed to go big, in those moments?
It's liberating. You're not accountable to, certainly in that character it's all absurdity, and it's the theater of the absurd.
Yeah.
And you're not, you're really, it's almost like you can't make a misstep because you're not accountable to anything in the moment before. You know what I mean? You're just surfing.
Yeah.
And in a normal, in a conventional character, there are certain boundaries, and well, my character would do this but wouldn't do that, and all that.
Yeah.
And you just throw that out the window.
Yeah.
That's really, there's no real secret to it.
No.
I mean, when a guy's head gets blown off and then grows back,
you can do whatever.
pretty much
everything.
4 feet off.
Everything's on the table.
Gravity is gone. Yeah.
Well, I did want to. I wanted to ask about a personal favorite movie, but and the experience of Galaxy Quest, where I know a huge amount of fans, but you're also you're having been on TV playing the satire of television, and I was wondering what that experience was like.
Well, again, that was I guess in my life, there have been just a lot of happy accidents. I went in to meet the director, Dean Pariseau, genius. And Dean, I first went in to talk to him about Guy Fleegman, Sam Rockwell's role.
Oh.
That was what I thought we were talking about. And I mean, that is what we talked about. It wasn't exactly an audition. It was more of a meeting.
Yeah.
I liked Dean a lot. And I wasn't sure about this script because it seemed very, I think this script, I really have a strong feeling that this screenplay in another director's hands might not have worked as well.
Yeah.
Because it was really broader on the page and goofy on the page, kind of.
Yeah.
And I think Dean did such a brilliant job of casting it and of bringing out the heart of it.
Yeah.
So I went in and I talked to him about Guy Fleegman, crewman number 6. And then week 2 goes by, 3 weeks. And then I heard that Sam was going to do that part. And that was great. He's great. And then I got a call from Dean. He said, hey, we're having trouble finding Tech Sergeant Chen. So would you consider that? I'm like, that's an Asian part. I'm not going to play an Asian part. Even back then, it was like, nah.
Yeah.
And he said, well, we'll figure out something. I said, I don't think that on the page, that's my role. And are you going to change the name? No, we're not going to change the name. So I said, so I thought about it. We met and we talked about it. And I said, look, Dean, I'm not going to play an Asian guy. That's not right.
Yeah.
He said, well, we haven't really found the right fit. So I said, well, I'll play a guy who plays an Asian guy. So that's how that happened. I've told this story ad nauseum in many interviews, but he said, let's take a look at the pilot for Kung Fu, David Carradine, because he wasn't. Yeah. And he was playing, a half Asian. Yeah. He said, maybe there's something in that. Yeah. So we did. We that was the days of VHS. So we watched, I watched Kung Fu, the pilot. Yeah. And then there was this urban legend that David Carradine was stoned through the entire shooting of that series. Like every day, every episode, all day, every year. So I said, Dean, maybe this guy's kind of like a burnout. And, maybe that's another, because there wasn't really anything on the page that I could do. Yeah. So we literally took out all of that character's dialogue, all of it. And we literally made it up with the writer and Dean, the director, every day, and the other actors, because they had to kind of play off of it. And we just I had no idea what we were doing.
What was the experience like that on set? How did the other actors react?
Everybody was fine. Everybody was like, okay. I mean, I guess maybe we did some of it. Because I was the tech sergeant, so I had to go into the thing. But we made up all that stuff with the group hug and this. And then I had the idea that if this guy was a burnout and a stoner, then he carried snacks around with him all the time. Yeah. I said, Dean, could I carry snacks? He goes, sure. So I don't know.
I love it.
It just like fluky accidents that just happen.
Yeah. I mean, I did we mentioned Monk earlier, but I wanted to go back, what made you at that point in your career want to do a series like that? Especially a procedural.
Well, I had been going out of town to work. It's a simple answer. Yeah. I've been going out of town, and I had 2 daughters, and they were in school age. And I just I don't want to keep, because films are mostly, Canada or, New York or whatever. And I was away a lot. And so I spoke to my reps and I said, look, maybe there's something, keep me local. Yeah. And so this came along, and at first I wasn't that into it. I mean, I wasn't sure it was the right fit for me. But my manager was really good. She said, well, look, just sit down with them, sit down with the writer, sit down with the network, tell them what aspects of it you can work with and what you would like to not do. Yeah. And that I did it, and they were so open to my suggestions, because
what were your suggestions?
Originally, just to full disclosure, that show was conceived more of like it was broader. Yeah. it was more, I think, a Inspector Clouseau-ish kind of thing. And then for a while, Michael Richards was circling it. And then the writing was moving. They were writing it more towards Michael Richards.
Yeah.
And it had like pratfalls and and it was like fun. But I thought, God, if I'm going to do this, I'd rather do this as a half hour because it's goofy. And then lo and behold, that's what Michael Richards did. That same year, he took a sitcom about a detective. It was right after Seinfeld, and I think it lasted one season but it was basically a detective sitcom, multicam. And anyway, so the writers were really good. Because I said, look, let's let this the humor of this material come out of the pain and the disorder, and we don't want to make fun of this disorder, right? We got to honor it, but let this sort of grow out of that. And they really, really worked it to fit my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
And I thought this is comedic, but there's a dead wife and there's obsessive compulsive disorder, which is really serious and disruptive to people's lives.
Yeah.
I called Dean Pariseau because I felt that with Galaxy Quest, Dean got the tone right, balanced the humor with the pathos. And I said, I need you to do this pilot because I don't know what it is. And we need it to be a balancing act. And luckily he had a project that had fallen through or something and he was available.
Yeah.
So he said, yes. And he directed the pilot. And I'll tell you, again, so much has to do with the direction. And he found that sweet spot.
Yeah.
Or I should say because the writers, working with Dean, working with me, working with the producers, the creators. And we found that groove. But I've really come to also discover that a lot of times it's just timing.
Yeah.
The timing of, because that script had been sitting at ABC for like 4 years before USA got a hold of it. A lot of actors had circled it and people had not turned it down, or they had turned other people down, and whatever. And I just think the time has to be right for it.
Yeah.
And it just kind of struck. And there was a lot of discussion about the USA Network because at the time they were kind of transitioning. They wanted to compete more original series. They didn't have a lot of original series.
Yeah.
Again, so they were able to nurture it and put more time and attention and promotion behind it. So, and weirdly, again, it was USA had the brilliant idea to premiere the show in the summer and not premiere the show in the fall. This is before streaming, even before a lot of, cable was prime, what do you call it? Premiere channels, HBO. They were doing stuff. But typically shows were premiere in September, fall lineup, blah, blah, blah. And they did not want to compete with that.
Yeah.
And they said, we're going to put this on in the summer. Well, people were like, whoa, no one's around in the summer. And all that's on in the summer is reruns.
Right.
And they said, that's why we're going to do it, because there's nothing new to watch.
Yeah.
And we think because people can now DVR and blah, 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 that we're going to premiere. And then it was unbelievable. No one had thought of that before, I don't think. And then everyone did it. And now everything premieres at random
there's no
times.
schedule anymore.
But for decades,
Yeah.
it was the fall lineup.
Yeah.
And everybody was competing for eyeballs and advertising dollars, right? And so, again, the timing, this network rebranding itself, all of these things had to fall into place in order for this thing to work.
Yeah. I mean, well, to talk about sort of the TV landscape, I wanted to go to Maisel, which, obviously we saw the wonderful clip and, it's coming, the next season is the last and it's coming to an end. But I wanted to ask about sort of, when you're entering it, about, what it's like sort of having been in all these different eras of TV, and TV has changed so much, sort of, the experience of a streaming show and the experience of what, that allows, and what sort of working with an auteur like Amy Sherman Palladino allows as well.
A completely unique experience, really.
Yeah.
I had never done a streaming before. My memory's not great, but I don't think I had. But I got this material. It was just a pilot.
Yeah.
There was no Amazon just needed to see the pilot in order to figure out if they wanted to pick it up. So we just did the pilot, and to be honest, there wasn't a lot of Abe in the pilot. Abe was a tertiary character, really, but the writing was so tight and so good, and I love this period, this time period. I love the 40s and I love the 50s, and I just feel, I don't know, it suits me. I mean, that's what struck me about Barton Fink. I mean, right in the 40s, Hollywood. I mean, it just, I don't know, it's just a light goes on for me. It's a good time for me.
Yeah. Is there something about like the style of acting?
Maisel was started in the late 50s.
Yes.
And that was a period when I was a child.
Right.
This is the 1950s, in case anybody's getting. So I have these memories of these cars and my father and his friends and my uncles and people dressing like this, and the role of women in that period, and how women are regarded or not, and my older siblings who were and I had also my daughters at this point were around the age that Midge is, so I had that sort of like, oh, I'm an older father, and I have that to a daughter and to daughters, and I have that connection. So there were many intersections for me in my life, my upbringing. And I had this whole discussion with Amy and Dan about that stuff. But I needed their assurance that, because as I said, the pilot Abe was not featured that prominently in the pilot. And they said, no, if this goes, we're going to service all of these characters, and there's going to be a lot of development, and that's what all I needed to hear, that there was going to be an evolution. There's so many things about this period that appeal to me. First off, no personal computers and cell phones. That's I just love that. I just, when I'm doing things that are contemporary and it's all screens on screens, and doesn't sit well with me. That's what I liked about Monk. We were a low-tech show.
Yeah.
It wasn't like the CSI high-tech.
Right.
Not to disparage CSI, great show, but in terms of like, we can solve problems by clicking buttons, and we were much more Sherlock Holmesian kind of oriented.
Yeah.
And that's what I like about Maisel. Phones are attached to a wall. They're not, you have to go like this. They're not cordless even. And there's, if someone doesn't pick up, then you just live with that frustration. And then guess what? You call them back because that's how we lived, and nothing was that urgent.
Given that Amy and Dan told you that, there would be this evolution of Abe, what have you liked about sort of the evolution of Abe and sort of spending time with him over the 4 seasons that we've seen and the 5 that you just finished? You just wrapped.
Finished filming 5.
Yeah.
About a week ago. Yeah, week and a half ago. So exciting.
Yeah.
What I really liked about Abe was that, you know, he, like many men of his time, they were in transition. This, what's brilliant about this series is that it moves from the late 50s into the early 60s, and that was a huge cultural shift going on. And men at this period, and I remember this from my own father and those guys of that era. My dad was actually a little younger than Abe by, I don't know, 10, 12 years maybe. But there was, my dad went through a midlife crisis. And part of it had to do with, the cultural shift, corporations and small businesses getting beaten down and swallowed up by larger corporations. And Abe goes through that. Abe goes through a period where he's disillusioned with his own work. And also his daughter is not, playing by the rules. She's not playing by the conventional. Divorce was a big deal then, especially if for a woman with children, without a career, without an income. And the upheaval that that happens in her life, has an effect on all of our lives. But she does this thing that is really unconventional, and Abe and Rose have to adapt. And interestingly enough, it's such a family based. It's about a woman finding her voice in a professional, pursuing a profession, but really it's all family based. Because Joel, the ex-husband, stays in our lives.
Yeah.
He's there
still there.
a lot. Yeah. And interestingly enough, the relationship, what I love was the relationship between Joel and Midge. Not just Joel and Midge, but Joel and all the other characters. They actually grow and get stronger than they were when they were married. They're closer than they were because when they were married, everything just was what it was. It stopped. It became what it was, and it did not evolve. Whereas with the upheaval, it definitely progresses and changes. And I think that's such a brilliant way to watch, to define and watch characters change and evolve. So Amy and Dan, I mean, the discipline with which they write and the discipline they demand in speaking their words is just incredible, because there was no improvising. There was no veering from the script. I'm talking about letter perfect, punctuation perfect. This would not do if the word was that, and all of that. And interestingly enough, it wasn't confining in any way. It was created a kind of level of trust and commitment that I rarely would see, rarely experience. And again, I keep going back to this notion of the musicality of it. If you did veer from the dialogue in one take, the music sounded funny. It was slightly off key. And when you got it all just right, it was like, yep, that's the melody. That's it. There's no clunkers. There's no slight sharp or flat, or it's just perfect.
Well, we're going to go to audience questions soon, and there's a mic over there, if you can see where I'm pointing. So I'm going to ask one more question. If you want to start filing, if you have a question and want to start filing to the mic, please do. But you mentioned musicality, and obviously it's a very different kind of musicality, but I wanted to ask about, you've been doing theater all this time throughout all of this, but the band's visit was obviously very special. And, what was the decision to do a musical too at that point?
It was not they kind of held a gun. They held a gun to my head. I mean, I was not on my list of things to do.
Yeah.
I'm not a singer, and I don't think I've really done musicals in the past. I've never been approached to do musicals in the past, but they just would not leave me alone. They would not take no, and they kept saying, "Well, we'll tailor it to you," and I'm so glad I did it. I turned it. I said no a number of times, and then it occurred to me that it was going to be bad. I just thought it's going to be fall on the face time, fall on my face, and then it just struck me, why not? Why not? Why? So you fail. So what? It's not the worst thing in the world.
Right.
I mean, I've had many.
And obviously, you didn't fail, to be perfectly.
Well, I didn't, but I had to make peace with the possibility. But then once I got into it, rehearsing, and I saw that I was surrounded by these geniuses. I mean, Katrina Lankin, and I mean, every one of these people were just on such a high level, and I was supported in such a way that they were really in my corner, and it was terrifying. Yeah. Most every night, because I had to sing a cappella in Arabic, even though I sang very little. I had to. Not only did I have to sing, I had to, and then I had to sing a duet part with her. She is in the stratosphere.
Yeah.
She is not human. She isn't. And I was, even though I had very little to do, I was so impressed because I never saw her breathe. I would be sitting like this close to her. It was like she was hooked up to a machine that had. I never saw her inhale. It's amazing. And this endless reserve of, power. And also real, I just didn't want to mess her up. And so it took a lot of work and I just was white knuckling it every day, every night. But it was so satisfying when it worked.
Well, we're going to go to some audience questions. And now, just as a reminder, just one question, please. No follow-ups. We only have a time for about 4 or 5, so we want to get as many in as possible.
Fair enough. Tony, thanks for coming tonight. It's a pleasure to meet you.
You too.
Some of your other roles include you did the voice of Luigi for the Cars franchise, and you also did the voice of Splinter for the TMNT films. I was just curious to know if you have younger fans who recognize you for roles like that, and
yeah. If I get a fan mail thing or something, it's a lot of times it's parents, sending pictures of Luigi for me to sign for their children, or the little toy, in the box. What do you call that? Yeah. And and the turtles too, the Ninja Turtles thing. Yeah, and there's a different. Sometimes I did a movie years ago called Polly, which is about this bird, this talking bird, and that was really fun. So there's a certain audience for that, and Men in Black, I guess, and even 13 Ghosts, which I never thought that would have a shelf life, but
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, a little down. Mr. Shalhoub, thank you so much for all your work. And I'm going to be really honest because this just happened yesterday, and I know a lot of us relate to this. And you talked about humbling and humility. And this happened yesterday. I was supposed to be booked at a theater, and they called me and they said, we would like to have booked you for our season, but actually we're only hiring people with names. Obviously, I feel like a spear was put into my heart. And that really hurt because I don't think any less of the work that I do, but how do you handle that? And I was, trying to say, well, these are hot topics. And, it was a no-win situation.
Sure.
They were like, we have to hire names for our season. And how do you deal with that? I mean, I have a tough skin, but I didn't yesterday and I don't today.
No.
Thank
no.
you.
Well, to be honest with you, a lot of people say, well, this is a tough business and you have to have thick skin. And I'm not a subscriber to that. I'm just not. I think the reason we chose this is because we have thin skin and we allow ourselves to get, to be vulnerable and to be, hey, it's rejection. There's nothing, it's an endless rejection. I mean, there's been much in my life, and I know, if people say to me, "Oh, so you're working all the time?" No, that's not true. I mean, maybe it looks like that on the outside, but I'm not going to tell you how old I am. But there is a lot of misfires and a lot of no's, a lot of things that I really, really wanted and thought that I was perfect, all that shit. But to get back to your situation, you have to take that and you have to, that's a story. Just in the encapsulated version you gave us tonight. You have to use it. I know that sounds trite, but you move forward, and it's these knocks and these rejections and even the failures, like I was talking about before, that are they're more valuable than the successes. They really are. That's small consolation for you today, but it's about picking yourself up and it's about, and I have to say it, getting a little pissed off. You're entitled to be pissed off and to feel that it's not just. It's not just. We're in a business of not just. If we're looking for that, if you're looking for constant gratification and validation, no.
Hi, Tony. Thank you so much for everything that you've shared today. I appreciate you being here. Quick question, something you brought up earlier about trying to get the audition right. This plagues me when no high stakes audition. I'm creative, I'm free, and I'm like, oh, I'm good. And then I get an audition. I'm like, this is your career. This is your dream, and you have to book this. I shut down trying to get it right. So advice for those moments, please. Thank you.
Oh, boy. Yeah. It's interesting, this audition question, because I struggled with, I was a terrible auditioner and I struggled with it for so many years. And then when I was on Monk and I was a producer, I got to sit in on casting sessions. That was one of my jobs as a producer. And I saw that I wanted to hire everyone. I wanted to tell them, you don't have to come in with "don't hire me" stamped on your forehead. You don't have to do that. It's the hardest thing. It's just not an exact science. So many times, but this is what I can tell you, because I know nothing about how to audition, but this is what I can tell you from being on the other side of the table. If you don't get the job, it's not because you didn't do a good audition. Very often. Sometimes you tank it, and we all tank it. But 90% of the time, it's nothing to do with your work or your skill or your being in the groove on that given day. It has to do with some preconceived notion that they have in their head, or, oh, I can't hire that person because they're too much like this person who I already have, or God, that person would be good in a different role or in a future. I used to do that all the time. I'd see somebody that was so good, but we couldn't hire them because it wasn't right for that for one reason or another, but we would bank them. We would put them in our file and would say, we've got to use this person. We just have to find the right part for them. So that's, again, small consolation, but it's, I'll tell you a quick story. I hope I'm not telling tales out of school. It was a really, I don't know if it really is pertinent to your question, but it's a great audition story. And maybe it's helpful. So we're casting Monk. I was cast, and then we're reading people for Sharona and Stottlemyre and all the other regulars. And a number of people go to network. 3 or 4 people in each part get taken to network. So these people have auditioned they've had callbacks, and now they're going to do their network audition. And it's a room very much like this, about this size. And it's a lower stage. And there's like 14 USA executives up there, men and women. And Ted Levine comes in. Ted Levine, who played Stottlemyre, did not pre-audition because his agent said, he's Ted Levine. He'll go to network. That's it. So we're like, great, okay. He comes in, and because the others had pre-auditioned 3 times, they were off book. He was not off book. He had the pages in his hand. This is a network audition. So we're here, the director's there, and I'm reading with all these guys, right? I don't know Ted. I've never met him. I loved him and his work, but he's got the pages, and he's very quiet. I can tell. I mean, those network auditions, it's like you can cut the tension in the room with a knife. And so I remember, because I had the first line in the scene, so I was kind of waiting for him to give me a nod to go ahead. We were up here like this, and you're me, and so
Okay.
yeah, he's there, and he's just staring at the script. He's just staring at it for the longest time, and I can tell he's not comfortable. And so he looks up at me at one point and gives me a nod. No. I'm sorry, I misspoke. He's looking at his script before he looks at me, and I'm just waiting. And he looks up and he goes, "Fuck every one of you people." And then he goes like this to me. And there is a moment where, and I'm like, there is a split second of nothing, and then they all burst out laughing. But he doesn't laugh. He doesn't smile. He just looks at me and goes. And so I start reading, and we read the scene. And then he leaves the room, and I look at Dean, the director, and I'm like, come on. I mean, come on. It was amazing. And I didn't see him again until we're in the makeup trailer. We're shooting the pilot now, months later. We're in the makeup trailer, and he comes in, and I said, I got to tell you, that was like, you did something that I would dream, I could never do. But he said, I discovered a while ago that if you go to audition and there's one person in the room, that one person has a lot of power. And if you go to an audition and there's 2 people, they don't have twice as much power. They have half as much power, because one is wondering what the other one is thinking. Do they know, is their taste better than mine? Do they know more than me? And if you have 5, 10, 14 in this situation, they're a 14th as powerful. So they're all like us, again, fear. They're in a position of power, but they're terrified. And he said, what, and I could see it. What he did was, they had the power, and he just went like this. I'm taking the power because I'm going to get this, or I'm not going to get it, but I'm going to do it on my terms. And of course, he got the job, and 8 years later, he's, the guy. Anyway, I don't know if that helps, but it's such a fun story.
Yeah, it's a really good story. Thank you for your work in Spy Kids. That was a very formative work for me. My question is, you have got to work with so many different directors. Was there an experience that stood out for you as the most productive or most pleasant one? And what?
To all those film directors, you mean?
Yeah,
Those?
maybe somebody who was bearable to work with. And what made them
a director that wasn't, you mean?
No, was a good experience.
Oh,
Yeah.
I've been very fortunate. I work with so many great directors. I've worked with a number of first-time directors. When I was mentioned this movie 13 Ghosts before, I'd never done a movie in the horror genre, and that guy was a special effects specialist, and they gave him a movie to direct, which is why the special effects. He's a great director. But it's different when you're working with a first-time director. There has to be a little bit more of a dialogue, They don't always know how to, they don't always know the vocabulary. I'll tell you a quick story. I worked with I won't mention his name. He was a writer, a really good screenwriter, and this was his first movie. And it was based on a true story. And we were rehearsing a scene. I played like a low-level gangster in this movie, and we were rehearsing, not filming, just in a rehearsal room. First time I'd work with him, first day, and I thought I was in the pocket. I was doing my thing, working with the other actors, and he comes over to me and he says, this was his first note. He says, "So this guy is a human being, right?" Literally. So I'm thinking, I am on the wrong track here. But no, I feel like I've been really lucky and haven't had too many negative experiences or situations where I felt like, oh my God, they're steering me in the wrong direction. But here's the thing. This is always going to be a collaborative venture, but the director really is the guy who's got the vision. And so you have to give over. And, people ask me a lot about like advice, young people who are coming up, for example. And I've thought about this a lot. I've given many lame answers because it's just so hard to give advice. The business changes so much and is constantly changing. But this speaks to your question. What I've distilled it down to is the best advice I can give is it's not about you. If you can hold on to that through these experiences when it's challenging or you're working with someone or that's you're questioning or whatever, because the business is so ego oriented, and so we all get caught up in that, and it's all about advancing the ball and advancing our profile and our brand and moving to the next level, whatever the hell that means. And I'm not on social media, but I know that social media has a lot to do with self-promotion and so forth. It's all fine. It's all necessary. It's a necessary part of it, whether you have a publicist or whatever the hell. But you have to not lose sight of the idea that it's not about you. It's about the material and the vision of the writer and director. And when you can embrace that, it can be freeing.
You've played roles, characters with such interesting personalities. I'm just curious to know, like Abe from Mrs. Maisel or Adrian Monk, were these characters or any other character that you've played inspired by people that you've you know personally or have met in real life?
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, my characters are more like an amalgam of a number of people that I've either knew or grew up with or have met in my life. You know, I mentioned earlier I'm from a big family. I have 6 sisters and 3 brothers, and frankly, a lot of them are in my characters. I mean, we're very close. We stay close, and they've been a very big influence in my life and very supportive, of course, and supportive at times, critical at times, but legitimately so. So I carry them, and I think I play those cards occasionally. But yeah, I do. I think you have to draw on your life experience, and sometimes it's just so hard to talk about. I don't like talking about acting in terms of my process because it's so subjective. It's so personal, really. I could tell you what I do, but it wouldn't be of any use to you because it's my stuff. It's, you know what I mean? It's inner things. It's dreams. It's daydreams. It's my imagination. It's not actually translatable, I suppose. But I think you do have to draw on, the thing about, I go back to this one. I was in the drama school. We had a lot of great teachers. One teacher was really, she was actually our speech teacher, but she gave us an exercise that really has stayed with me. And it's a really simple, short exercise. It was homework, basically. She said, when you're out on the street or when you're out and about in the world, not in school, not in class, but in the world, really, really be observing everything around you. She said, I want you to bring in a phrase that you hear from a civilian, a person. Just a short phrase. Can be 2 words even. But really take it in and absorb it and do it exactly like you heard it. Practice it. Feel, she didn't want us to record like with a recorder, but just a listening exercise and a vocalization exercise. And it was fascinating what people brought in. My classmates, in just 4 or 5 words, if they really were, doing it exactly right. I mean, you could glean so much from that person. We didn't know that person. We never saw that person, but we could visualize so much about them, whether it was maybe a homeless person, or maybe it was a cashier, or maybe it was just a person screaming out the window of their vehicle or whatever. Or maybe it was a child, or maybe it was a person who had fallen, or whatever it was. It just I guess my point is that we have to be in the world. We have to be observers in the world of everything and we have to have our antenna finely tuned, and even when it's something that's harsh or that we want to turn away from, those things too, we need to take them in and absorb and retain. And those are tools for us to use later.
Hi, Tony. Massive fan. I have to say, Monk just brought a lot of levity to my household when I was a child. So thank you so much. You are a massive influence in my life.
Well, now I feel old.
Hey, man, I'm only 29.
All right.
That being said, I would barring the band visit, has there been a time where you get a script in front of you or a role and you're just like, oh shit, I got to do this. And it's like,
Yeah.
how do you tackle that? And what do you do to get through that?
Yeah, sure. I'll tell you something. In the last, I would say, 20 years, maybe 25 years, I find myself more often than not, I respond to material I don't understand. In other words, I respond more to material that I can figure out when on the day when I read it. I like the process of discovery. I like the process of mystery. I like the unknown. And as I mentioned before, I like the possibility of missing, of failing. Because that's where the good stuff is. That's where the risk taking is, and that's where if you read something and you go, God, this is really good, but you know exactly what you're going to do with it. For me, that's not so interesting. It's fun. It's like a great feast. And every once in a while you want to do one of those because you need a win. but I like the ones that are sort of inscrutable and excuse me, and maybe even impossible. So that you get a play. Let's say you're doing a play and you get to the end and you go, I never figured it out. I never got there. I just don't get it. But I tried this and this, and I thought I thought about this. I threw away that choice, and you know what I mean. I never really got there. But it was a fun, kind of exploration, and maybe I got some of it, But more often than not, I want something that's going to keep opening to me. And if it's a movie role, that's a little more challenging because it's going to be frozen. Whatever you do with it, it's frozen. And but I like things that I can't, even with film and television, where it's really why series kind of get, I think, movies were kind of like the thing for a while and series were second tier, but a lot more writers and actors want to do series now. Writers especially, because they're not confined to a formula of, by half hour point, I got to have this happen. And then by this, in the third act, I got to have this happen. And then it has to resolve at the 2 hour mark. If they can do a limited series or a series that runs for 4 or 5, they love that now because they can develop story and develop characters and take tangents and for actors, it's great if you have the right fit, But I forgot your question.
Oh, it was just basically, have you ever had, you just booked a show or like a play and you just look down at the script and you're reading it and you're just like, oh shit, man, I just way over my head. And just how do you navigate those waters? But I would say
I think those are the ones that are the most worth doing. And a lot of times those projects, they really bring out the crazy. They bring out the insecurity, and they can be crippling and debilitating sometimes. But you just gotta go, and you just gotta keep and don't worry about doing it well. A very dear friend who was a teacher and a director of mine, told me once in a play I was doing that I couldn't figure out, and he knew I was struggling, and he said, "What's the matter with you? You're not, why are you in such agony?" And I said, "I just want to be good." He said, "No, I don't want you to be good. I want you to be, can you be terrible? Can you go out there and be terrible?" And I was like, "Yeah, I can." And it was so liberating because he gave me permission to suck, which meant that I could take huge risks, which this particular role called for, but I was afraid to go there. and he needed me to go there and expose more. And this is another rehearsal great line he told me. He said, I don't feel that you're exposing enough of yourself and this character. Why are you holding back? I said, are you kidding? I'm like hanging it all out. I can't show you any more. I don't know what you're talking about. I have nothing. I am like flaying my guts out. I said, what do you want? He said, I want you to show them your dingleberries. So I did. So, I mean, figuratively, not literally. But that was a great note because that's. I think that's a good place to end.
What a way to end. Tony, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. You're a lovely crowd.